Welcome back to the Q&R Podcast. I'm Rebecca Hanna, Director of Kids and Family, and along with Michael Keller, Senior Pastor of Redeemer LSQ, this podcast is for the seeker and skeptic in all of us. It's designed to create a posture of curiosity about ourselves and about others. Last month, we tackled one of the loudest narratives in our culture, which is this idea of my truth versus your truth. And today, we aim to build on that through answering another question: aren't all religions the same? In recent years, our culture has moved away from organized religion, and this question is getting asked more and more frequently. But as we'll learn, part of the problem is that many people are not familiar with what the world's holy books actually have to say. So in this episode, we really attempt to uncover the truth while embodying this posture of curiosity. We start by unpacking what unites all religions before moving on to where they divide, and specifically how the case for Christianity stacks up against other faith. We hope you enjoy it. So episode 4, here we are. The question is, are all religions the same? I really appreciate this question. Our family was walking down the street a couple of days ago, and my 7-year-old, there have been some people around the city asking, have you seen these people? Do you want to go to church on Sunday? They ask that.
I haven't seen them.
It's normally young women.
Okay.
I've been asked on the subway and on the street corner. And they are not Christians. They're not evangelical Christians or whatever that category you want to put there. And my daughter looked at me and said, well, why didn't we interact with her? And what church is she talking about?
Do you say as New Yorkers, we don't talk to anybody? No.
Well, we were in a hurry. Yeah. We're in a hurry. We don't have time for that. But that was the conversation. So I had to engage with her about not everyone believes in Jesus. Not everyone believes the same things we do.
Right.
And so this is a question that my 7-year-old's asking. It's a question that we're all asking. It's a universal question that people are wondering the answer to. So why do you think it's important for us to have this conversation?
Well, I'm first of all, that's one of the reasons why I love raising my kids in New York is the assumption is not everybody has the same view.
Yeah.
I mean, there's all kinds of places all across the world where there's just an assumed view. Everybody has the same view. Mm-hmm. And, but it's a common question, but it's actually a growing question in a pluralistic secular society where Christianity in America had been the norm for, hundreds of years. And that's become less and less a norm. And so now the question that people are asking is, well, there's a lot of different religions. Are they all the same? Mm-hmm. Can they all be true? Are they all equally not true? And I just see it more and more. And it's a good question because mm-hmm. different religions say we're right. Mm-hmm. And there's a view out there that says they're all wrong or they're all right. And I think we have to ask that question. Mm-hmm. So there's different reasons to do it. So as our culture moves away from a very particular assumed normative view.
But you think it is?
I think, yeah. I mean, I don't want to normalize New York for the rest of America, but if you look at the statistics of the growing number of what's called nuns, which are people who on surveys say they have no particular religious affiliation. If you look at the
irony of them being called nuns is not lost on me.
Yeah, well, I didn't pick that sociological term. Yeah. That's the term that people have. If you look at the assumptions in our political spaces, when we look at the decline of those who have de-churched, I think I saw a statistic recently that something like 30 million people in the past 50 years have left the church. So it's the greatest change in religiosity in America. I think we have to say, okay, where are we at then? And I think the assumption that's come up is, or at least the questions come up is, are all religions the same? Are they all equally valid or equally not valid? Mm-hmm. I don't know if you've heard the same in your experience or around.
Yeah, I mean, the question that my daughter was asking is, and I believe the lady was from the Church of Latter-day Saints, and they're going to talk about Jesus. And so she was pretty confused. We believe in Jesus. They're saying they believe in Jesus. So what am I supposed to actually understand? And so the question then, because a lot of people want to believe all these roads lead to the same ending because we love happy endings. Who doesn't love a happy ending?
Yeah.
And so we really want to root for everyone getting to that same heavenly place, if you will, or that same good ending of whatever that religion offers.
Yeah, I mean, my own personal story, I grew up in a Christian home, but then when I got to college, and there's I kind of could see a difference between the home I grew up in and the home, and then where I was now, and I had to own things for myself. I kind of had an existential crisis, and of like, well, what do I believe? Just because I grew up in a home doesn't make it necessarily true. There's a famous, this is years ago, I remember watching what was then called the New Atheist, Richard Dawkins. He was being questioned in North Carolina, if I remember the YouTube, and I think it was a girl, she must have been a teenager, she looked at Richard Dawkins and said, well, how do you know this is true? And he looked at her and said, what do you mean, how do you know it's true? If you grew up in Madagascar, if you grew up in China, you wouldn't be you're probably a Christian, an evangelical Christian. She's like, yes. She's like, well, if you grew up in these other places, you wouldn't be. So just, how dare you ask that question of me? Well, I remember watching that and going, wait a second, Richard Dawkins, if you grew up in Madagascar, you wouldn't be an atheist. You wouldn't be so that means then it's not fair to just say where you grew up, it must be what's actually true or not. We still have to kind of figure out what that is for yourself. And so I remember going on this whole exploration and studying a lot of world religions and trying different ones on, because this question is prevalent as culture psychologically gets away from a normative view. We're asking this question more and more and more. What does this look like? And do all roads go to the same place? Because in the past, an individual in America could say, I don't have to think about this question because we all know Christianity's true, because it was just the normative view. Everybody's a Christian because culturally Christianity was the normative view. That's just not the case anymore. And I think people are having to go, well, then what is my view? And how do I what does it look like to include? Maybe you live in an area where you have some friends that have very different religious views. Okay, are they the same? Are they equal? Can I disagree with you but not hate you? What does that look like?
Yeah. I do think that it's important for us to even recognize that we are living in a place we live in New York City, so I'm constantly, and raising our kids here, they're asking, why is that person wearing that? Why do they have that in some kind of religious garb on? Or if you walk by synagogue at a particular time and they're all, on the ground praying, or whatever that looks like, because I've seen both of those in my neighborhood. And so I think it can be confusing for people because you want to love people and you want what's best for them. Right. And if they're embracing their faith, shouldn't we just be happy for them? Well,
we're asking, what's the most loving thing? Is that the most loving thing? I mean, you can make the argument that it's not necessarily the most loving thing to accept somebody who holds in something very strongly, but they're wrong. At the same time, who am I to say what to say to somebody else? And I think this leads to a lot of angst and calcification. But I think what we can say, I want to ask you a question. There's probably a lot of similarity. One of the reasons why we're even having this conversation is I think there are a lot of similarities across different religions. I remember in one of my religions classes, we literally put down the ethics of Hinduism, of Christianity, of Islam, and the Ten Commandments, of Judaism, Christianity, Islam, and Hinduism. There was so much that was similar. And I think that's where a lot of people make the conclusion, well, there's just a lot of similarities, so maybe they're all the same, if the ethics are very similar. What would be your answer to that, or what are your thoughts on just the similarities of how many major religions line up ethically? Not 100%, but that they're very similar. What's your thoughts on that?
I'm not sure.
Well,
ask me the same question in a different way, maybe.
Well, I'm glad that you even said it that way, because I think that's where a lot of people are, is that they say, hey, these religions are all very similar. They all maybe they're all alike. Maybe they're all the same. Is it follow that if they all have the same ethic, then they all must be the same? No,
because we're coming from a different motivation. So the motivation for those ethics are different.
Okay, so that's a good answer. I think that's helpful, because I think a lot of people say, hey, on the outside it's the same. Does that mean they must be the same on the inside? So okay, that's helpful. But I think it at least gets at the problem of, if you have very similar ethics, I've heard some people say then they all must be the same. I disagree as well. I think for a couple of reasons. One is that, first of all, there aren't 100% equal. There are very big differences in what people would say in these different traditions.
Sure. The laws.
Yeah. But
rules.
also from a Christian perspective, it's possible that the reason why so many religions have very similar ethics is that, at least the ones that agree across all the way, that there's something about humanity that knows how to live. And I think
right.
I'm thinking of Romans 1, that that written on the human heart is this way of, like, we know at some level how to actually live. Like, it seems universally true that you should not murder other people. Mm-hmm. Now, if you go to an evolutionary, a naturalist understanding of people, that we've evolved just to pass our genes on, it's not necessarily true that not murdering other people is the best way to get your genes passed on. Now, I know there's a lot of social Darwinism, which, by the way, Darwin himself disagreed with, that says, hey, we've evolved as cultures to do that. We've evolved to have the term "don't murder" because it's the best way to pass on. But that's not that doesn't necessarily follow. Mm-hmm. So I just think it's some people look at it and saying they must all be the same, or is it possible the reason why there's so much similarities is there actually is a lot of agreement across humanity to know, generally speaking, we shouldn't steal, we shouldn't lie, we shouldn't, because it'll go poorly for us if and when we do.
Yeah. I mean, I would personally call that common grace.
Yeah, me too.
Which we need to explain what that means.
Yeah, we should.
You should do that.
Common grace is this idea in our Christian tradition that the world would be a lot worse off if we all disagree, that we didn't have similar views when it came to our ethics, morals, and stuff like that. That there's something inside the human heart that actually we can work towards, even across different faiths and disagreement on religion, that we can actually say this is good. So Christians can partner with non-Christians to end human trafficking, because there's a lot of non-Christians that are like, human trafficking is wrong. Now, that would be a common grace agreement to fix the world to be a better place, even though we disagree on so to speak special grace of why we should do that. Mm-hmm. Christians would say you should do it because of the larger paradigm, whereas common grace would be. It's a beauty that we can have, and it's important, because if you can only ever partner with people that you agree with on special grace, then you're in trouble, because that means you can only hang out with other Christians, and I don't see that in the Bible.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I would describe it as, because we're all created in the image of God. Yeah. From our perspective, we are made to reflect Him, and therefore, through common grace of being created as a human to reflect the perfect human, right, then we do have some commonality in God's goodness. Yeah. He's going to help us in his goodness and his kindness. Yeah. So His kindness doesn't just reach the person who is believing Him, but the person who doesn't believe. He's kind there too. Yeah. In the interaction of the world around us.
Yeah, and I think that's we're having this conversation. Like, where's Michael and Becca going on with this? Is that this is the explanation for how you can actually have religions from a Christian perspective,
and have similarities.
That have similarities that don't necessarily hold on to the idea of they must all be the same. I think that's important,
because we're trying to reach a moral ground, a moral conclusion of good, of good things.
And I'm very happy that we have a lot. I think it's one of the reasons why. Again, I think I asked this in the last podcast of how do you have a city that has so many different views, so many different people, so many different disagreements, living on different truth, but how do we not just be perpetually mad at each other? The good news is I think there's still some commonality of we all agree, like not everywhere, but we agree on a lot of major issues of like what's right and what's wrong. But there are really big differences in religions about the afterlife, the meaning of life, the how to move out into the world, like what our posture should be. Should we just what happens when you die? How do you actually get to God? Who is God? I think I was talking with some folks the other day, and they're like, what does even God mean? That term God. So I think there's a ton of disagreements when it comes to faith as well. But I don't know if you've seen those. Have you seen those in your experience?
Yeah, and I think there is a sense in which a big difference is that Jesus is the cornerstone for the church. You understand what I'm saying?
No, tell me more. Where are you going with that?
So when you're talking about all these the motivations, I come back to the motivations. I'm motivated. Mm-hmm. My life is dictated by the personhood of Jesus and who he is. Mm-hmm. And so I make choices based off of my experience and truth and belief in Jesus Christ. Right. And so that motivates me to do the same things as maybe someone from a different religion would do. But my internal motivation is different than their internal motivation. The external can look similar, but the internal is different.
That's a super helpful distinction, because I think we do need to get there when we come to evaluating religions, as far as, okay, if you have the external that's saying that we all think that these things are the right way to live, and they're not, again, I think we're being way too reductionistic to say every religion has the same view about how to write. I'm just saying there's a lot of similarities. How do you get there actually does matter. But I want to pause for a second and just illustrate our problem. And the best way to illustrate this is a very popular parable that I've heard growing up, but I don't know if everybody else has. One of the ways that people try to illustrate this idea that all religions are the same is this Indian parable. I'm going to read it. I have it here. This is how the parable goes. 6 blind men examined an elephant. One at the trunk said, an elephant is flexible like a snake. One blind man was on the leg and said, an elephant is inflexible like a tree. One felt the body and said, an elephant is impossible to get your arms around. You can keep going. One felt the trunk and said, no, an elephant is like a hose, that's flexible and bendable. Oh, there it is, flexible like a snake. All right, there's different ways to do it. I've heard the parable in different ways. They're all correct and incorrect. None could see the whole. So all religions are partly right, but none see the whole picture. Mm-hmm. So there's a view out there that says all religions are essentially the same. But one of the main views that I hear from most people in New York is, well, they're all kind of right about some things like, ethics and morals, but they're all essentially wrong too, they're wrong because they all exclusively say they're the right way. And we all know that they're just all different ways, because none can see the whole. So all religions are partly right. That's an illustration that I hear a lot of people use. I've actually been in debates on college campuses, and people break that out and say, see, religions are like this. Small problem is that the only way you can tell the parable is if you assume that you can see the elephant for what it really is. And so the person telling the parable is basically is the only one to claim, I actually can see that all religions are essentially partly right and partly wrong. See, how do you actually know? If the parable's point is nobody can see the elephant for what it really is. Well, how come you can? And I think it's helpful. That's a helpful way to point out that there's no way not to be exclusive when it comes to religion. You were kind of asking this at the beginning of the last episode of when it comes to truth, that when somebody says, hey, I think all religions are true, you're basically saying, my religious view there is the most true religion. Or you say all religions are false. You're saying your view is the most right way in a very religious way. So when it looks good on the surface, say, well, nobody can know. Nobody really knows. But you're saying, I know that nobody can really know. And that's still a truth proposition. So I like to call spades a spade. I grew up in New York. I want everybody to be honest. Let's be honest here that there's no way not to be exclusive with your view. If you say, I think all religions are junk, you believe all religions, that is still a belief system. If you say all religions are the same, you just admit that you don't see the only way you can say that is if you can see all the truth, and you can't because nobody can see everything. And be honest about that. And Christianity, I come from the Christian perspective. We definitely have an exclusive view too, because we think Christians think they're right. But I think let's just be honest. Everybody thinks they're right. You say, no. I don't think who am I to say that my view of right is over your view of right? But when you say that phrase, you're saying that's the best way to be right in the world. There's no way not around it. I don't know if if that resonates with you at all, Becca, or what you think about that. But that's, I'm pulling it out because I want to say this is where we're at, and I think it's a helpful way to say, what's the answer to people who say all religions are eventually the same? I just want people to be honest and on the same page.
Yeah. Well, so let's break down some of these claims of other major religions.
Probably one of the reasons why I personally came back to the Christian faith is I think when you get to those ethics, the morals, how to live, in my experience, in every world religion, and even my friends who wouldn't hold a world religion, they think maybe they're agnostic, maybe they're spiritual, not religious, which is still a view. Essentially, there's a right way of living, and I need to live up to it. So in Buddhism, there's again, this is super reductionistic, but you're supposed to make a trip to Mecca. You're supposed to pray 5 times a day, give alms to the poor. There's the 5 pillars, so to speak, of how to live. And if you do those things, it's not to guarantee that Allah is going to bless you, but it is. If you do those things, that is a right way of living that you are encouraged to do, and it'll go well for you. I think in Judaism, I think in Hinduism, in most of these major world religions, it's here's the things that you need to do, and you need to live up to them, and if you do, then you're in. And again, the agnostic view is, well, there's a good way to live, and there's a bad way to live, and you need to live as a good way. Christianity is the only world religion I know of, and I'm happy for the listeners if they want to put in the comment section or something like that of our podcast. We'll try to interact with them if we can. It's the only religion I know of that says here's how you should live, and you never will actually on your own. Not fully, not completely, not for the right motivation. I think this is what you were getting at earlier. That at some level you can't and you won't. Hence, you need someone who does, and belief in Him as gratitude grows in your life for how He loved you anyway, you're going to desire to do and to love and to serve and to follow these morals in a different way. That seems to me categorically different. And I think is a distinctive, when people say all religions are true, I go, wait a second, that not even how you do these things are the same. And the motivation seems really, really different, as the one I just articulated. And I think that's what you were getting at earlier.
Yeah, I mean, I come from a counseling background. I mean, I have a theology degree also, but in counseling, I think one of the conversations I've heard, particularly in talking with secular therapists, which I do a lot and really enjoy it because there's so much to learn from each other.
Yes.
But there's a sense in which religion, regardless of what it is just another tool. So it's a tool to make you feel better if you're suffering with fill in the blank.
Right.
So if you're suffering with anxiety, you use God as a tool to make yourself feel better. Or if you suffer from OCD, you use God as religion as this way to help you overcome in some way. And that's just what you're going to use. It might be different for somebody else, but for you, and it kind of, in those conversations, I always walk away feeling like, and this is interesting, feeling like I've been called weak. I'm so weak that I need a religion. Like you're so not competent to handle yourself.
It's like a crutch.
It's a crutch, and that's your crutch that you're going to use. And so, and I think it makes that person feel weak because it's saying you don't actually have what it takes, and so you're just using this. I don't need that. I don't need that religion because I can actually do this on my own. And so it really is. It's an interesting conversation to have because it's viewed as whatever religion you want to use. You can use it to make yourself feel better about you.
That's fascinating because it's almost like it gets back to the original question, which is, are all religions the same? And we say, yeah, if it helps you, go for it. If it doesn't help you, go for something else. But ironically, you said, what was the phrase you said? It makes you feel weak. And almost, I think that's a good example of, you basically took my experience and you placed your own view of how these religions are actually working, which is you can't prove it. So there's a religious assumption on it about how you should use these things if they help you get through life. And it actually nullifies your religious experience. And that's why I think it's very fascinating when people say, hey, all religions are actually equal. And it's supposed to sound good because it's supposed to be inclusive. Ironically, you just gave an example how, no, that actually makes me feel really terrible because you localized and subjected my experience to your
Yes.
universal view
Yeah.
of how all religions should actually be.
Yeah. As a Christian, then, though, my next step is to embrace the weakness and go, oh, I am actually really weak. That's the beauty of the gospel and why I need the Jesus that I actually do have.
Yeah.
So there is a happy ending there, just
Yeah.
for the record.
Well, this is actually super helpful because it's not, I don't have to necessarily disagree with you. I disagree with the universal application of, this means religion is just
A
for
crutch.
usefulness. What?
A crutch, yeah.
But you can actually say, actually, in this particular, yeah, I do actually have a need because I can't do it on my own.
Well, then we would say the difference then, because where I end up going with that of there's actually freedom in understanding my weakness before a perfect and holy God.
Yeah.
And because I can recognize that freedom, I actually do feel better because I'm not having to live up to expectations that I just can't. Again, it's that self-awareness.
So how's
and
that? Since the context of what you just said is in the context of other religions, how does that actually apply as far as differentiating
Yes.
between
So then I'm wondering for you, and this is a question for you to answer, can those other religions end up in that place where weakness is actually embraced as I can be weak and it's okay? And I don't have to obey all of these laws perfectly in order to get to where I'm trying to go, because there is grace for me to mess up. There is grace for me to be weak. There's grace for me to fail.
Yeah. So I know you wanted me to answer that question, but before I do, I wanted to throw it back at you and just say you're clearly coming at it from a Christian perspective.
Yes, I am.
So what would be the unique thing about Christianity when it comes to you have these 10 commands, these morals. What's unique about your interaction with them as a Christian versus how anybody else might interact with, like, hey, we should be good and kind and moral.
Well, I'm wondering, because I don't know as much about these religions as you do or as anybody else does, but the tenet of repentance for the believer is a gift. So repentance is a gift. That's part of Christianity. So I get to embrace that as a privilege. It's the privilege of repentance. So I can mess up and repent, come back before God, because we believe that Jesus is that mediator that we need. And do other religions have that as an end? Yeah. And does that, you know what I mean?
Yeah. And I think again, we have to be careful to say we see every view. And I think we said last podcast that we're warranted to believe what we believe until we come up against something that challenges that. Other religions do have the sense of, some of them have the sense of repentance and even forgiveness, but it's very different and than a particular Christian view. I think the beeline comes down to who ultimately is the who's not in charge.
The forgiver?
Not so much in charge, but like who's it come down to ultimately? Is it up to you to live a good life, or is it not up to you to live a good life? My perspective is that Christians live a good life, or desire to, as a consequence of how they've been loved. They love well because they've been loved, or there's a desire to. Whereas I get the impression when I was, for instance, when I was a Mahayana Buddhist for a hot minute, which is, there's a wheel of samsara, which is desire. Your problem is desire. You need to get away from desire. And part of getting away from desire is to realize that there is nothing. As far as human consciousness, you're all part of one. I'm being really reductionistic and going very quickly to those who.
But you did this for a while.
I did for a little while. There's a lot of practices and meditative spaces to kind of work through the wills. You have this desire, and the problem with the world is desire. We need to get away from it. That's where the problem of conflict and the reason why you have issues is because at some levels desire, and so the key is to try to get rid of that. In a weird way, even though Buddhism basically says the human consciousness this is all sort of an illusion, it's still up to what you do to kind of get there. If you're gonna get to the next level, if you're gonna nirvana wasn't talked actually a lot about in when I was practicing, but where I kept on having a problem. I had a couple of problems. One, which is how can you be you and not you at the same time? Like realize there is no you, but it's you to realize there is no you. I had all kinds of
Which is the antithesis to the culture right now.
Right. But there is so much, people are using mindfulness, which is blowing up right now, probably in your counseling tradition, which I'd love to hear more about if you have thoughts on that. Just they're moving more into Eastern practices to try to calm you and because they're trying to empty yourself. But I still feel like that's still you doing. And I felt like Christianity was so different of, there's things that you should do, but you're not fully ever going to. Not rightly, because it's a heart motivation. My heart motivation was about me still, ironically, the me that there is no me. Whereas Christianity had this very different view of there is a you, and there is desire and suffering in the world, but you're not. If it's your motivation to try to get rid of it, then if you do it well, you're going to get prideful and look down on other people. And if you don't do it well, you're just going to get depressed and sad. Either way, you're going to end up being not the person you're supposed to be. So I think where Christianity solves that is with gratitude of it's already been done for you. That seems to me a very different way to interact with these, what is known as, hey, we should do good in the world. But the reason and way, I think, I'm just quoting you, of doing them comes from very different backgrounds. And I'd just love to know your interaction with that, particularly the mindfulness stuff from your background or from the counseling world. What do we do with that? Because it's increasing, not decreasing.
Yeah. I mean, there is proven worth in breathing techniques and meditation, and which
proven as in scientifically proven.
Scientifically proven, but also Scripture talks about meditating on God's word and slowing down and having Sabbath and rest and.
Yeah, but I'm going to push a little bit that the meditative that from the practice I was doing was emptying your mind. It felt like Christianity is filling your mind. Like it's still meditation, but there seems to be different types of meditation.
So I would actually argue we have to empty our mind in order to fill it.
Okay.
Because
I can live with that.
My mind is a scary place. I'm telling you.
You need to empty it first.
I literally woke up singing. I don't know what I think I was singing Wicked in my because we saw Wicked this weekend, and literally I woke up singing Popular at like 5:30 in the morning. It's terrible. But that's where my mind is.
The character is blonde, and
I know, and yeah. But I'm constantly like trying to not sing that song, or I'm constantly trying to not replay a conversation in my head, or constantly not trying to go over like what I'm going to make for meals, or what. There's so many things to actually, or the anxiety of whatever it is that I'm carrying.
Yeah.
And so we so subconsciously have all of these things on our mind all of the time, particularly if you're a heady person like I am. I carry it around. I'm in my head all the day. That's like, we're just up. There's like elves in there,
Lots
and
of
they're
stuff going
they're
on.
running, they're doing overtime and pulling files from all kinds of places. But
that's a nice image.
So you're welcome. But to empty my mind of that isn't for me to go into a nothingness. I empty it so that I can actually focus on what is good and what is right and what is. So when I wake up and I lean over and I get my phone, there's a difference between me opening Instagram immediately and opening the Bible and reading Scripture or whatever that, right? So I am actually filling my mind with something eventually, but I have to empty it in order to get there. Well,
I like that you brought that up because I think the whole emptying mind, you mentioned that there's proven practices about that. See, that's that common grace stuff. Like we can learn things. There is some commonality with other religions, but then it's what you do with that. Like, is it enough? Is it just, and you're saying you fill it back with.
Yes. So like breath work is actually, it's only most effective when you are learning that technique when nothing's wrong. So if you're trying to implement,
But isn't something always wrong?
Well, if you suffer from post-traumatic stress.
Yeah.
And someone's like, oh, well, just do some breathing. Okay. They're like, that's not going to help me. It's not going to help you because when you weren't experiencing that stress or whatever it is in a different moment, you weren't practicing. So it's actually really hard work to utilize those things, which are directly connected to your body and your stress. And there's so many other factors going on there, right?
Yeah.
But I think it's important to realize that the motivation, again, of where am I trying to go with that?
Right.
Am I trying to actually just get better for the sake of getting better? Or am I trying to heal myself, grow nearer to Christ, be transformed into His image, so that I can actually function better as a human being and flourish in my family, in my community, to do better.
Yeah. That's super helpful, because even though this conversation was sort of a heady conversation of all religions are the same, you're showing me like, hey, if there's, we use medicine when we have a headache, right? We use Advil, we buckle up, we use a seatbelt. Why don't we just pray to God when we get in a car, say, God, take my life. If you want to take my life, why don't we use a seatbelt? And the reason why is that there's some good practices in the world that we can use, and they don't have to be, and there's some commonality with other views that are out there that we can agree on. Whether it's, you brought up the meditative stuff, but I think this is helpful for the listener to kind of say, well, yeah, if I have a belief system that's very particular, what's my interaction with people who I disagree, I don't agree with everything, but are there some things how do you not be syncretistic? I guess I'm asking you a question of like, well, I'm going to pick a little bit from Hinduism, I'm going to pick a little bit from here.
That's a great question.
Because these traditions have developed in and of themselves, that are internally consistent, but the latest thing that people are doing now is they're just saying, I like a little bit of this view, I like a little bit of that view. Yep. And how are you feeling? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think it does go back to our last conversation of my truth versus your truth, because if you are a believing Christian from God's word, then there are some truths that are going to dictate what we believe. But I also think that take the Muslim who is going to be on the mat facing the right direction, praying 5 times a day, right?
Yeah.
Have you ever downloaded one of those apps on your phone that reminds you to pray?
I think like for a hot minute I did.
Yeah, you did. Why?
To see if it would be helpful to see if
because you felt compelled that you needed to pray more. So when the app failed to do its job and you didn't actually pray more, how did you feel?
I deleted it.
You deleted it. And then you felt a little guilty for a second and thought, well, I'm a loser that's not praying as much as I should.
Yeah. Is there something else I can do to do it?
Maybe I'm speaking from experience here. Yeah. The consequence of me failing at that is different than the consequence of a different religion failing at that.
That's a really vivid way of saying, okay, we can use these different practices to see if they actually help, but then what do we do with that when it doesn't work? I guess I was also asking, in addition, I think what's coming more, and I think because we prioritize the self in our own, you do you mentality, that's just sort of the way of the world right now. People are not that bothered by, you're not finding hardcore atheists these days. Very few people, if you look at the percentages, very few people say there's no such thing as God. I mean, instead they look at the world religions and say, what can I pick and
what's going to make me feel good?
Yeah, well, mix and match to do my own version, and I want to interact with that with also the concept that you brought up earlier. Hey, there are some things that have commonality and we can actually use and be helpful. Common grace, right? But we would actually there's a difference between common grace and special grace in the Christian tradition. So how do we hold that view, but does that work with the idea that I can pick and choose from any view what I want and kind of mix mash it together to be what I believe?
Yeah, that's where a biblical worldview is primary, because the conclusion I'm going to come to is different. So that's why scientific data, particularly with the brain and the mind and the nervous system, and we learn so much. Yep. It's so helpful. But I'm going to come to a different conclusion with that data because of my biblical worldview versus a secular worldview.
Yeah. And I would add, and maybe because this is how I think. I love that. That's super helpful, Becca. I think the other way to look at it is if you're mixing and matching, now you actually have a world religion of one. It's your version, and a lot of people are like, hey, I'm okay with that, but
they better be perfect if that's what they're doing.
There's an assumption inside of that there's not that these things can work together, and B, it doesn't really matter if they don't, because it's how it makes me feel, and for my own view, which I think is a very particular Western individualistic modality, and I think we have to just be honest that that's a relatively new way to kind of interact, and is that really going to work? And I am a big believer. I'm fine with people going, I'm going to try this. I'm like, great, go for it. Let's talk about it. How did it work? And if faith and religion is just, how do I self-optimize? Then that's how people are going to go about it. But I just don't think that the world religions at least have a little more. The benefit they have is that they were not created in a Western individualistic world, and so they have a better job at being consistent. I think people don't mind being inconsistent. They're like, whatever, I can do whatever I want. I'm like, okay, let's see how that works for you. Whereas that's where I get back to Christianity. What I find unique in the Christian faith is that it's not propagated, it's not dependent on your ability. Whereas I think everything, this is what changed my life, is that everybody else, it's like, it's up to you. Even
every other religion.
Yeah, every other religion. Even the view I just gave you, which is like you get to pick, mix and match. It's
that's
still
what I'm saying. Unless you're perfect, you're going to get that wrong.
That's what I heard you say. And good luck with that. Tell me how it goes. And I think Christianity has a very, I think, more realistic view, which is you should live this way, but you're not going to.
So
be honest about it. Well, so not that you're not going to.
You already
not. Yeah, you're already not going to do it.
Not being honest about it is actually the privilege of the Christian.
Yeah. What do you mean?
Because I can admit my failures.
Yeah.
I can admit where I'm wrong. I can admit that I'm not going to always get it right.
Yeah.
And there's freedom to fail.
You're saying you don't see that in a lot of other spaces?
No, because if you fail, you're out.
Right.
And if you fail, then you've got to start over. Or if you eat the wrong thing, or if if I've got to show up to do whatever.
Yeah.
That's not how Jesus operates.
Well, there tends to be two types of people, right? The people who are like, I have failed and now I'm out, or I'm doing pretty good, and they're pretty prideful. They're like, I did it, why can't you? And there's people inside the Christian faith act that way too.
Yes, 100%.
But because you can either be legalistic or you can be, antinomian and like whatever. It doesn't really matter. And either way, I think they end up hurting.
I think the other distinction too, as we're talking about these, is that Christianity is seen as an exclusive religion.
Yes.
When really it's actually the most inclusive religion, which is what we're talking about.
Right.
Because any failure is welcome.
Yeah. What shows what is the most welcoming space? So that gets back to that question of what's the most inclusive, exclusive view? I'm a Christian pastor, so I'll show my hand. I think Christianity, again, the core of it, has a man dying for his enemies. And if a Christian puts him at the core of your life, then you'll die for your enemies. And so you're going to include people because it's not based off of if you just do these 10 things, then you're in. It's completely based fully on unmerited, free grace of what he's already done in history, in time, in reality. Whereas I would say other religions, and even my friends, I want to interact with my non-Christian and agnostic friends. They have an exclusive view too, but like I always ask them, my view has a God who dies for his enemies. I put him in the core of my life. I'm going to die for you. So that's why I'm going to die for you, even if I don't agree with you. What's going to let you die for me? What's going to let you include? Even though I believe Christianity is true, I will lay my life down to try to care for you and love you as best of my ability.
Romans.
Yeah.
Even for a good person.
Right.
He would die.
Right.
Someone would think about dying, but for a bad person, who's going to die for that?
Well, and I think but then my counter question is, well, what's going to let you do that? And I think this is one of the ways you evaluate the different Christian traditions. The different religious traditions is, does your view, is it the most inclusive? And I know for my faith, it's the fact that I have a God who dies for me, so now I can die for you. What's going to let you die for me? What's going to let you, if somebody's a terrible, awful person, what's going to let you still care for them?
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
It does. I think the other question is, Christianity is about a relationship. Versus what?
Precepts.
Right. Versus law, versus making sure you're doing the right things.
Christianity has law, though.
There is law, but the relationship makes the law different than other religions.
It changes our relationship to the law.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, because my motivation to be obedient is actually because I love Jesus, not because I want to do all the right things at the right time necessarily.
Because you don't always want to do all the right things.
No, I don't. No, absolutely not. But I do want to love Jesus.
Because he loved us.
Because he made it possible that for me to be a failure and be okay. So
then
I can be confident as a failure.
Yeah.
Not because I have great self-esteem and I'm building up my self-confidence.
Yeah.
Because that doesn't work when you're failing at different things.
Yes.
But I have confidence in a person, in that relationship that I have with him.
Right.
Which actually I think has to precede identity, and that's another conversation.
Right. Well, I mean, for the Christian, the law shows us how short we fall, because you look at it and you say, can do all these things, and you don't actually do them. The 10 Commandments, like, have no other gods before me. Oh, we already failed.
Yeah, well, and that's what I'm saying is those are laws that we do need to follow.
Right.
They're ethically speaking, morally speaking.
Right.
Everyone should follow that, no matter what religion. Right. But when we fail to do that, what happens? What do we do?
Yeah. Well, and I think that's what you mean by it goes to a relationship.
A relationship.
Yeah.
I have somebody to talk to about it.
Right. Well, and I think, again, I'm appreciating this convo because we've talked about how there's similarities when it comes to morals, but now we've been talking now recently about the particulars where there's difference. A, that everybody is exclusive. B, how do you relate to the morals? Is it what I'm trying to do? Am I trying to live up to them? Or is it how through a relationship my life's changed with gratitude? Now I don't have to, but I want to. Mm-hmm. In that sense, that's a very different move.
So as we bring this conversation to an end, I think it's important for us to talk about the empirical evidence that maybe suggests Christianity is true over other religions.
Because we're comparing and contrasting different religions.
The resurrection, for example.
Yeah.
How would that be evidence of that?
Well, for those who are listening, I do think hopefully this whole conversation, we're trying to talk about how...
The resurrection of Jesus. So death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus, which is important to...
Yeah, well, I just think to tee it up, I think we, as Becca just said, we do agree that you can compare and contrast. One of the unique things about Christianity is one of the core tenets is that the resurrection of Jesus was a physical, bodily, and historical event, mm-hmm. that it actually happened in history. And everybody's free to verify that and look through the evidence for it. Like, mm-hmm. how did first century Jewish people that were probably the least likely individuals to believe in some people believed in a resurrection at the end of time. Some believed there was no resurrection, but nobody believed in a one person in the middle of history resurrection that changes everything. And how did these people all of a sudden do that? And how was there 400 witnesses? Most people you can't have a mass hallucination, and you tend not to you tend not to get 400 people all to lie at once. You can get 10, 20, 30 people to lie. But then if the apostles were lying, why would they die? Why would they die for what they, for a lie? You tend to lie to gain something, but the minute you're about to get hung upside down on a cross, which some of the apostles were, crucified upside down, you tend to say, "Uncle, I'm not," and that goes into history. So there's all these. I'm pointing out, I'm giving you a litany of lists of questions that, no matter you're a believer or not a believer, you have to come up with an explanation for these things. Mm-hmm. And it's verifiable and historical. So I do think there's something special about that. I think there's something in the Old Testament prophecies and then the fulfillment of them, and how they have, and how do you have 66 books in the Bible and multiple authors over thousands of years have like such incredible internal consistency. Even though there's differences, there's differentiations, there's terms, there's whatever, but you have actually an amazing internal consistency. How does that happen? So these are just examples of mm-hmm. evidential answers. I'm not pretending that whoever's listening is like, now I fully believe. I mean, but we want you to kind of ask the questions to say there are multiple religions. Okay, I think Becca and Mike has shown me that every faith view, even the view that they're all the same, is still an exclusive faith view. So which one's the most inclusive of the exclusive views? Okay, Christianity says,
all are welcome.
Yeah, all are welcome through the death and resurrection of Jesus. Okay, how do I verify that? I think I think everybody's welcome to actually look for that verification. Can you fully ever? We talked about this in other podcasts. Like, can you prove Napoleon actually existed? I mean, you can look at the evidence, you can look at letters, but at some level, you're going to have to like say it's more likely than not. And I don't think when you believe any belief, I don't think anybody has to have 100% certainty. And what I mean by that is this: nobody has that. Are we 100% certain? If I want to get, this is Michael being nerdy again. Are you 100% certain that you're not in the Matrix? No, you can't prove if you're not in the Matrix because you don't.
If you're in the Matrix, you don't know.
You wouldn't know, exactly. So you can't be 100%. But I think the question is it more likely than not? And I think you can get there when it comes to Christianity as far as a faith view. But would you add anything to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's important to talk really quickly. Practically speaking, interacting with other people from different religions. Obviously, in New York City, that's more common, honestly, than running into a Christian, unless it's someone you already know. We say all the time that the Christian world in New York City is tiny, right? It's a small bubble.
Right.
But there is a sense in which being able to interact, I think about my kid on the playground who's asking, do they know who God is and what church do you go to? And she's flabbergasted that someone doesn't know who Jesus is. Because for her, that's what she knows.
It's her background.
It's her background. So being exposed to people from all different religions and places, actually it's really beautiful, because even from a young girl and a young faith, it's going to help her grapple with what she really does believe, and maybe even faster than if she was in a different context.
Yeah.
So I think as we're learning how to treat each other or interact with each other, and I am thinking in a very personal way of the mom on the playground, maybe the person in the workplace who's surrounded by a whole lot of different other people. How would you say this is the way, or this is not the way, but the paradigm from which to think about this as you interact and love these people? Yeah,
and I think this is a good way to end, because I think this is sort of like the real cash value of like how should we actually interact and treat each other. And we're assuming, as far as our listeners, not everybody. We don't think everybody has the same view, but if you're coming from the Christian perspective, I think we have incredible resources to be able to be curious of people who we don't necessarily agree with. I think it comes back to what we said in the last episode. Do you have an ability to be a little bit humble enough to say, I don't know necessarily everything about their experience, and to ask questions? And if you are a Christian, you can have this non-anxious presence because you're not saved based on everything you know. As you said earlier, it gives you immense comfort knowing that I don't have it all put together and I don't have to have it all put together. And I think we can still rely on that tradition, on that truth, to go into other people's lives and say, hey, we disagree on this. Okay, cool. Where are you coming from, and how does it work? And you can be okay with other people not having, asking you back questions, because why? You don't have to have it all figured out either. Mm-hmm. If you get a question that you don't understand the answer to, you can say, that's a good question. Let me think about that. Mm-hmm. And maybe I go ask other folks or your community or other people. So I just think that there's incredible resources here, that if the core of Christianity is not based on what you do, Becca, Hannah, Michael Keller, it's on what has already been done for you through Jesus, his life and death and resurrection as the sign of the new heavens, new earth being fixed one day. We rest in that space to be able to interact with people we don't necessarily agree with, and we don't know everything. We don't have to know everything. Mm-hmm. And I just, to your daughter on the playground, oh wow, okay, there's a lot of people. What's this look like and why? And we can move into these spaces, even people who disagree with us, who don't understand us, and be like, okay, well, here's what I'm about. And I'm thinking of the woman at the well in John 4. She didn't have everything figured out when she ran and told everybody else. She just said, come see this man who knew everything about me. And when she didn't say anything else after that, just says, but the implied thing is, and he still stayed with me and loved me and didn't reject me despite knowing everything about me. Mm-hmm. And if that's who we are, we can do that with everybody else. Mm-hmm. Even if we don't know everything about them. If we ever do find out about our friends and neighbors and some pretty dark stuff, we don't have to reject them either. Mm-hmm. Anyway, I think this is great resources for us in that space.
It's great. Thanks, Michael.
Yeah, thanks for the convo. It's great.
Thank you so much for tuning into this episode. We covered a lot in today's conversation, but this is just meant to be a starting point in your journey of curiosity. Be sure to check out all the resources we have linked in the description below to continue that journey.